Hello, my favorite people. Welcome to Numa. This is Alan Wiederhold, CEO and founder of Numa, and I have with me Mr. Justice Leak again. We're
Let's
doing
go.
uh, we're doing a part two. We had so much fun on our last one, and I think we both realized it was an hour and 45 minutes, and we could have gone for Joe Rogan style, like you said in the very beginning, 3, 4, 5 hours. But welcome back.
Thank
Welcome
you.
back.
Thank you for having me. I could do this all the time.
I was listening to our show that aired on Wednesday, and there are so many things I want to talk about. So many questions. There was so much that I felt like we were at 30,000 feet, and I really wanted to kind of get into the weeds of some of the stuff because we really talked about your backstory, but we didn't get a chance to talk about in detail where we're going and all the incredible things that you are creating in legacy, Darty. But I want to go back to the beginning a little bit because there were some things that we kind of, I think, just scratched the surface on. And for me, they're very, how do I say it? They're very important to me because when you typically say psychedelic, immediately what comes up? Just out of curiosity. We had very similar backgrounds. We're going to be youth pastors. We both went on mission trips to Guatemala. But when you tell people in your circle or former circle, like growing up, like I did, what would the response be when you talk about psychedelics?
Well, I had never talked about psychedelics, of course, until recently. But yeah, the idea was that it would, scramble your brain. You'd never be the same. Maybe if they were Christian, it was, taboo and or voodoo kind of, situation. Um,
So let's talk about that. Can a Christian be a Christian and use psychedelics?
well, the greatest living Christian I've ever known was my mother. And I'm here to tell you, she was no less a Christian after her 20 some odd psychedelic sessions than she was before. And in fact, it deepened her faith as it did mine. Like it reignited my faith. And it also kind of greased the wheels a little bit. She was able to let a lot of the hangups go. Her faith became, it always was very loving, very love forward, and very sacrificed. It was, she struggled when I ended up coming out to her, which I didn't even do it until, because I was trying to shed the thing myself. I was like, let me see if I can get rid of this before anybody has to know about it. But by the time I was in college and started being around theater people, well, um, I I was like, okay, this isn't going away, and I do believe that God made me this way, and I don't know what exactly that means. I would go on to learn, how indigenous people in America would refer to us as two spirit people, and they were often the
Duality.
spiritual leaders, which I was like, oh man. This makes a lot of sense because there is the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and I seem to be somewhere in the middle of that. But when I finally, I told her in a car, so we didn't have to look at each other, and knowing that if she rejected me, because that was the case back then, you just have to be ready that they will disown you or you're not going to have a home. So by that time in my young adult life, I had moved to Atlanta and I had started to know um, other gay people who were Christians, and these two guys really kind of took me under my wing. I called them my gay dads, and one of them, his father had been a Georgia minister, and I was like, and he still loves you, and they still what? And he was like, yes, and I got to watch their relationship, and it looked normal. The only images of gay relationships that I saw were, involve drugs and drinking and promiscuity, and it was hard to be like, yep, I'm that,
Yeah,
right?
I'm thinking like biker guys with chains and yeah, because
Yeah.
I think like that's what we were taught in the 80s and 90s about.
Well, they were the most visible because they were dying, and the thought, at least from the US government side, and then to a great extent the silent majority, was, well, the right people are dying, so it's a plague from God, it must be, not really understanding how sex works. and
Or how God works.
or how God works. And we really didn't move on it quick enough, and now the continent of Africa is really suffering. So going in with that confidence that I was at least gonna have somewhere to go, I told my mom, and there's tears. I mean, lots of tears. She said that I believed a lie from the devil and that she would never accept it, but that she would always love me. She did say that. So that was better than some of my friends got. And she was like, "How long have you known this?" And we kind of got into that conversation. I was like, "Well, it's kind of been, for a while." I was like, "Remember that dream you had?" She was like, "What dream?" And several months before, I had called her and she was distant on the phone. And I was like, "What's up?" She was like, "Nothing." I was like, "Come on." What's up? And she said, "Well, I had a dream last night." I was like, "Oh, what was it?" Because we love dreams in our family. Let's see what the message is. And she didn't want to tell me, but I finally got her to tell me. And she said, "Well, we were on the Oprah show and me and you were guests, and everybody in the audience knew what we were there to talk about except me." And I said, "And what did we talk about?" And she said, "You said you were gay." And I'm like,
What?
"That's interesting." Like, I didn't know how to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to tell her over the phone. I was like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. So when I reminded her of that in the moment, she said that she had completely blocked it out. She didn't even remember it. She was like, I just got to put that, you know,
Get thee behind me,
and
Satan. Get thee behind
right.
me, Satan.
Well, and what you realize, and I have so much compassion for her because it is like a death of the life that she wanted, that she had hoped for me to have. And it was kind of a death for me, to be honest, because I wanted kids and I wanted a family, and I was very, very disappointed. Again, back then, there weren't a lot of gay people having kids and families and all that. But, fast forward, my father would die, sometime later, and we became closer. We became closer after his death. But it really didn't change until I moved home and she started doing mushrooms because it it allowed her to work through again some of the same hangups that I had about myself. We're shaped by our parents, we're shaped by our community, and she was just able to let so much of that go. And she lost a ton of weight. When you see the documentary, you'll see like her first session, and in the Therapod video when she's like twirling around, that was after the first time. And over the course of the years, she lost so much weight because she was able to change her diet. We were walking 3 miles a day until she had this bad reaction to an antibiotic that basically sent her into late stages. But I it deepened psychedelics deepened both of our faiths. And then I read the book Immortality Key, which I'm sure you
Yeah, the Elysian mysteries. Yes.
and I was like, wait a minute.
We knew all along.
We
Yeah.
knew all along. And I remember being in high school, and I worked at a little Christian music and bookstore, and we had lots of music, so I could listen to all the music. And we had a VHS tape session that
It
you
wasn't
could.
it wasn't Zondervan's, was it?
No, this was independent. It was called Heaven's Depot.
All right.
Yep, right by the Winn-Dixie in
All
Montgomery,
right. Now we
Alabama.
are in the South now.
And so I worked there. We had videos. And so to occupy my time, I would just put in videos. And one of them was about Mormonism, solving the Mormon puzzle. And there was a Mormon church like in the parking lot of my high school where I was going at the time. And, it says Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It says Jesus in it. So, but after watching it, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of different things in there that are we talking about the same Jesus? But I had already had issues with the fact that on this one road in Montgomery, Alabama, where my church was, there were, 10, 15 other different churches. And I was like, something is amiss if we're all talking about the same God and meeting at different places. And when I read that book, I was like, wow, of course, how different would our Christian spiritual experience be if we didn't have a building that we had to pay the light bill and all that kind of stuff, which means we gotta
The business
the
side.
business side, which means that we gotta earn enough money, which means that we gotta curate exactly what we say to this audience so we'll get that money, right? If we were doing what we did in Jesus's day, meeting in homes, gathering with our tribe,
Having a meal.
and having that Eucharist, and if it did have a psychedelic element to it, we would not be in the situation that we're in right now because it demands self-reflection, right? It demands that. And
Yeah,
you know,
because I feel like most Christianity today is a label that we just wear. It's a "Make America Great Again" kind of a label. It's Christian nationalism. For some reason, they go hand in hand. I don't understand that, because as a follower of the way, we talked about, I don't like Christian, and actually, I think it's only used 3 times in the entire New Testament. It was actually a derogatory term that was used in fun of the early believers. They were actually followers of the way. And the way really was a new way, a new covenant of Moses, fulfillment of Abraham's and God's promise. So, how did you wrestle with this whole psychedelic conversation for yourself? I mean, we talked last time about the acid trip that you had, and that went horribly wrong in the beginning. But how did you come to the conversation with yourself first, knowing that you had this Christian lineage long before the immortality key and all the other research that you've done? How did you justify? Is that a word that you can put on it, I guess? Because I know for me, I was talking to my coach, my mentor, the other day. Sent him a voice text because we had the anniversary, and you and I were talking, and he and I were talking about sitting on the deck of his training facility, and he's like, "I'll never forget it. I'll never forget you being at war with your soul." And me saying to you, "Do you know that God wants to set you free?" And me being so resistant to, because of a label of what I had always. I'm just kind of curious, like, what came up for you? Like, how were you able to kind of navigate to say, yeah, maybe this is okay?
well, I think it really goes back to my friendship. He was um, a good man, a good father, responsible, also a Christian. Also, his assurance opened a window of opportunity for me because I wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. And as great as acting was, and at that time, 2017, I had just come off of kind of 3 straight years of pretty steady work, the most in my whole life. But I was still kind of playing characters that weren't really me. And what happens on set, there's a lot of downtime. You end up sharing your life. But because I'd had this blockade on what I could share and what I couldn't, I wasn't really fulfilled, right? I felt like everything was a performance when I walked on the set, when I walked off the set. And so I guess I realized that there was an opportunity. And my friend had done it once before. He had done it like 6 months before. And, it, if I didn't look at his life and go, okay, there's something about that that I want in mine, then I don't think I would have, like, if I was at a festival or at a bar and someone's like, hey, you want some of this? I'd have been like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So for me, I think the door was the person, was the guide, if you will, even though we were doing it, sort of together. And I'll never forget, he said something to me that still echoes in my ears. And he said, Justice, when I look at your life, I see greatness stalled. And it just rocked me because I knew I had potential. And I thought to some extent I was succeeding at that. I was doing this really cool thing that nobody I knew had ever been able to be successful at. But yet I knew that in large part, looking back, because I didn't have that spiritual moment, because I basically had to turn down the God voice in my head to be able to just live without constant guilt. And I remember telling him, I was like, Lord, I love you. I mean, I was a virgin for a very long time. And when I finally had the opportunity, I was like, listen, I love you, but I just can't, if I'm going to go to hell, I'd at least love to connect with somebody.
This is going to happen.
And
Lord, I love you, but this is going to happen.
well, and thankfully that situation was again someone I am so thankful. I wasn't abused. I wasn't forced into anything. I was thinking since our last conversation that there were times throughout my childhood where one time with like a age old story, scout leader, one time with like I was taking private lessons in drumming that I remember feeling uncomfortable. And both times I kind of told my mom, and she was like, "You're not going back. You're not going back again." So I feel thankful because my antenna was up enough, even though I didn't exactly know what what was happening. But when I finally was able to, it was with another Christian who had struggled his whole life and was a good person. And, I was like, all right, if, you know, of all the choices, this ain't so bad. And I did. I tried to find a church home, like I said, but nothing felt real comfortable. So when I had the opportunity in that 2017, 2018, as my acting career is going well, and this new friendship was opening up a new world to me, I was willing to give it a shot.
It's always an interesting conversation because I think back on mine, again, sitting on this deck, just saying no, even though I was literally like dying inside, really wanting to die on the. And then when we had our experience, I tell the story and I share it in my book. My wife was actually in the other room in her own psychedelic. She trusted the process enough that she did it for me. And the whole time we're building our dream home, eating her this line of whatever God wants if He doesn't want us to be together after. Because I'd actually had heard stories of people saying that they'd go into psychedelic couples and then they would see the potential outside of their couple and they would say, okay, we have to be ready for that. But in reality, really, it was this gigantic excuse for me because I didn't feel worthy of her. I never did because love broke me. Like, and then craziest thing happened every time she would pray or say my name in the other room, it's actually in my experience. So yeah, so it was the most beautiful thing. She guided me through a lot of my parts. And there was a part where I remember I was having this out of body experience. And I was looking down at myself and my wife is actually covering the bed where I'm at. And I'm looking down and got her hands covering me like a canopy. And God is standing over us with light. I see shadow and light and all this darkness had been hitting me. But it wasn't hitting me, it was hitting her. It took all of it, 23. Our entire marriage, all of my pain, all of my darkness, like all of it. And when they say, do you want to come back together? That's what could be one person could say, no, I'm good. I don't want to. And they prepare you. Like you have to be okay with that. And life could look a little different afterwards. And I will never forget when they said, Rachel's asking. The first time I was still working through my abuse. I was still trying to navigate all of that. And then the second time they came back in, I just started crying. I'm like, yes, yes. Because I had seen the potential of what God could bring, create. Why the Christianity conversation is always such an important conversation in this. I feel like, again, like what we're talking about, when you say psychedelic, it's this programming. Same thing about being gay or homosexual or whatever you want to call it. There's just narratives that don't even make any sense. We don't even question why or where things come from. And I always try to challenge my kids on any conversation. So how did you get your mom? So your mom is I love you, get thee behind me, Satan. I mean, I can imagine that conversation because I never even had the courage to tell my parents I was abused till 3 years ago. And then there's a billion questions. And then there's the guilt of and I just asked them, stop. You're making this about you. I'm okay. Like I have forgiven, I've moved on, it's done forever to do it. This isn't about you. So stop wearing the guilt. And that's where I felt like a lot of it comes from with parents. They love you so much that they want the best for you. Then they start questioning, like, why are you the way you were? Because you told the story and my heart grieved for you. You laid in the field. You just said, take my breath. And that's just because someone told us a lie. It's so crazy. So now you're in the car with your mom and you're having the conversation around psychedelics. How did that go?
About psychedelics.
I mean, you're like double whammy now. Oh yeah, I'm gay. We were on Oprah, and now I'm going to give you some mushroom.
Well, so that was,
Yeah,
24. I was like 24 years
yeah.
old. The psychedelic conversation
It was
didn't
like
happen until
15 years, 17, like 15 years gone by, something like that. But these are big monumental conversations. I don't care if they're 1 year apart or 5 years. These are big conversations.
yeah. Well, for her, it was, I found sort of in my gratitude list, I do this thing called 5 favorite things that I started in 2019. And it's changed my life. And so I'm sort of patterning a tool after it in the app. But I found where some of the things that I was thankful for or grateful for having that day is that I was mentioning it to her, and she, kind of she took it in stride. She had no interest in doing it, but it really was her, things getting so scary. She had that moment where she didn't recognize herself. And then, because in the beginning, I could still go off and work. So at the beginning of 2019, I was working on a show called Swamp Thing. I've done a lot of comic books. And that one was pretty cool because the entire soundstage, they turned into a swamp. So like deep enough water that you could drive a boat on it. And I had to drive a boat on it.
What?
Yes. And
That's
like
cool.
very carefully. And there were divers in the water and they didn't want me to go too hard into the set. But anyway, so in the beginning of 2019, she could still be left at home and she was still driving. Most of the places she drove were pretty close by, but I'd come home from working on that show and she was just super, super quiet. And she said, I had some foggy days while you were gone. And that's what she would call them. And I said, well, what happened? Well, you know how confusing that intersection is. And I guess I was driving on the wrong side of the road and people were honking at me. Now, this is literally the intersection, like right outside of our neighborhood where she goes all the time.
Mm.
So we're like, maybe we don't drive, at least for now. At least for now. That was devastating for her. And then eventually where she was volunteering at the hospital, she couldn't figure out the codes on the locks and taking people outside the doctor's office instead of inside of it. And I kind of gave them the heads up. I was like, will you let me know if it gets too bad? And so they called me, and that was really, really devastating. So as those things were happening and I'd shown her more of these videos, she was just open to it. And again, her turning point was like, she was like, well, I know, and I have this on video too, because we would pray, we would set the intention. I knew it was all about setting that intention. And so we did that through prayer. So I would typically blend up the dried mushrooms into capsules, put them in her hand, and we'd say a prayer. And so many times she would be like, don't make it scary. And I said, okay, can we use words about what we would want it to be? Can we make it beautiful? And she was always so afraid of saying, having a good time or seeing something beautiful, because to her, that would mean that she was doing drugs. And I was like, no, no, it's okay. We can ask for something beautiful. And she was always hesitant to actually say the word mushrooms because she was embarrassed about it. Oh, this one time, we were praying right before we were going to do it. And she said, Lord, I know you can heal me. And Lord, I know you can heal me without anything, but you can also use a mushroom to do it. So it was this mix of, look, you can do it on your own, but I understand that you can also use a mushroom to do it. But like I said, she was still so embarrassed of it. So we got into 2020 and then it was lockdown, and I was terrified of now bringing her in this deadly disease that no one knew about, because people may not know. You don't die from forgetting something with Alzheimer's. What you die is your body forgets how to function. And it's usually a illness that sparks it, and then you're in bed for a couple of weeks and then you just never get up. So flu is a big one. So when this, mysterious new COVID thing came through, I was like, oh my God. And it can be invisible for 2 days. Then we were in real lockdown mode. And I'll be honest with you, because it was hard to get weed in Georgia, I got a handle of tequila. And in the afternoons, I'd fix myself a margarita. Because I'm like, well, the world's falling apart. My mom's dying. I'm gonna have a drink. And I've never really been like a drinker,
Right.
but when the world was burning, I was like, what? I couldn't even
I've
see my friends. What's that?
so many people too. We just had 2 extra bottles of wine every day.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and one of the things that I am building into this new company is that I didn't have the tools for a highly stressful life and experience, and I didn't have a tribe to support me. I had friends, but they were all in Atlanta, which is 45 minutes away, and then I couldn't see them because everyone could get sick. And that is when I started to learn breath work. I came across Wim Hof, and the man changed my life. It's
That man
why
is
I
amazing.
epic, epic.
Well,
So
and it's as you're talking about the whole perspective of Christianity and good experience, bad experience. I was thinking of I told a story on a podcast a year ago. I was speaking at psychedelic conference in Denver, and I remember it was the second time I'd actually come out speaking about psychedelics, and it was about my book, Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics, and sharing my story of abuse and finding God in psychedelics. And this woman walks in and she's in the second row, and I see her for whatever reason she stands out. And as I was talking about my experiences connecting back to God, and I called the book Walking in the Garden because at the end of our experience, my wife and I were walking in the garden with God, both naked and unafraid, because we had now met each other for the first time, free of ego. And it was just like the craziest thing. So this woman comes up to me after and she says, "Are you going to be here all day?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Do you mind if I come find you?" That that I am a pastor of a mega church. Um, know who this was if I told you? And I said, "I know by where you are from. I know that church." And she said, "I've been struggling with this conversation, but believe that God wanted me to learn about it." And I Googled Christianity and psychedelics, and you were the first thing that popped up. And I flew here to hear you speak. Said God said to listen because he knows what I'm talking about. And I'm like, what? Like, and she came to find me later, and she's like, "I don't understand why I feel the way that I do when I walk by a mushroom, and I need you to help me understand." I'm like, how did I get here? Like, what the heck? And I said, it's just years of programming. And she's like, I really think God is telling me that there's a place for that. And I've talked to her a couple times over the last 6 months, and she's searching, still wrestling.
yeah, we need this. We need this. When it was, I guess, fall of 2020, maybe early 2021, churches and other things were finally letting us back into the physical space, but everybody was in masks. And we had just done a session a couple days before, Perky, she's dancing, she's feeling good. We'd gone to church, and afterwards, as you're walking out, you talk to the people that are your friends, and there's this one couple who, we'd go to dinner all the time, and that mom's known them for a while. And they know that she has this disease, and they're asking, well, how you doing, how are things? And she was like, oh, real good, real good. And I'm like waiting for her to tell her why, right? And I said, tell him. And her eyes are like kind of like looking around. She's like, well, how some days you don't feel so good, and then some days you just do. I was like, so 2 days ago, I gave her, 2 grams of mushrooms, and we did this thing. And her eyes go like this. And of course, their response is, that's great. We're glad that you're feeling better. I mean, anybody who has a problem with someone with this disease having better days, that's what makes her such a great story, because, like, you can't even fight it. You can't even fight it. She's losing, it's terrible, descending into darkness. She has some light. Well, I think nothing of it. And she doesn't talk to me the rest of the afternoon. And she's just kind of sitting in her, and I want to say it's maybe a couple days later, she's in her little sitting room, and she's still kind of, this. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, I finally know how you feel. About what? What it's like to have a secret that you don't want anyone else to know about.
Oof.
I was like, what? She's like you being gay. You told them that I did mushrooms, and I don't want people to know that. And I mean, it kind of gutted me because it humbled me. And because she used that example, I immediately had to go, wait, that's what this feels like to you? To me, I'm a zealot. I'm just preaching
Yeah.
it to anybody who'll listen. But I forget that the shame of this from when she grew up was that, right?
You were outing her, and yeah, wow.
Yeah, and my father, again, put people in jail for having this stuff. So I I can't wait to share this documentary with the world, because there are people just like her within the Christian community, and just the Christian community as a whole it's time for an update. And we talk a lot about prayer. We talk very little about posture. And what I've learned from the East is it's all about the posture and it's all about the breath. So you may not even need like a molecule to have that experience. You can start with just the breath work. But I can't wait to start to have these conversations with this community because they're struggling. They're on all the, anti-anxiety stuff, all the depression stuff, because they're having to keep this big old bright smile like nothing's wrong and the world's on fire, and they don't really talk, share their problems in church because it's become a show.
Can't share your problems in church.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
forget bearing each other's burdens.
mm,
Yeah, yeah, and it's the response I hear, and for whatever reason, Peter is always quoted about being of sober mind. And when you go back and you actually look at the words in definition or meaning behind sober, you have to question because just like you're saying, like 1 in 4 are on an antidepressant. So my wife works from home as well, and she was sitting on the island kitchen island, she's having her morning coffee, and she's screaming, "Do you realize that most women are 1 in 4 are on some kind of antidepressant?" Yeah, not surprised. But yeah, we don't trust. We don't trust God. We don't trust ourselves. We stuck in these.
because we haven't had to.
Yeah,
We can go to the CVS when there's a problem.
exactly.
And what happened when my mom had this disease, of which there was nothing you could go to the CVS for? But let me tell you something. You may not be a believer in anything, but if someone you love is struggling, dying, suffering, you're going to talk to anything that's listening. And it's been so beautiful to learn about the rich history of psychedelics across the world and their uses in these indigenous cultures, these tribes of which we came from, like the ayahuascas that can really cleanse us, our bodies, free us from so much of our dependencies. And it's not just pharmaceuticals, it's food. Listen,
Yep.
I come from the South. It's I love me some sweet tea, but that thing is a syrup.
Yes, I'm sure. The
Okay.
sugar. You get the sugar.
Right? So it's easy to condemn drugs, not the ones you pick up at CVS, not the ones in a bag of M&Ms at the convenience store, right? And the other drug that we're suffering from is technology, which is hijacking our, neurochemical system. So the way I like to talk about it is that there's a time for medicine work and there's a time for non-medicine work. And we need to understand the difference between the both. And one of the things that I'm putting into my app as a tool is called a consumption timer. And I learned this from my very smart friend who I first did psychedelics with. He's dad. He's like, I can't go off the rails here. So as soon as he takes something, he hits that timer. So he knows exactly where, he's at. And then if you're stacking anything else on top of it, time that. And so I learned that process, and a lot of my friends who have, done these medicines, they're not doing that and they can get into trouble. And I'm thankful that I learned that so that when it was time for me to start dosing my mother, I was learning, okay, we should be about here. We should be about, there. And if we had a little tool like that for all the things that we consume, because we're not just consuming things with our mouth, we're consuming things with our eyes, with our ears. I had a friend who I don't watch a lot of Real Housewives, not really my thing, but he was home for one Christmas, and we had known each other in Los Angeles. And just being around him, I was like, the way that he talked was like kind of a little catty and dramatic and something. And I was staying at his house. And then so he turned at some point during the day, turned on Real Housewives. And I was like, you sound just like them. Well, so in the same way that we are influenced by the 5 people that we interact with the most, whether they're in our physical life or, in television, we're absorbing, we're not just absorbing, funny one-liners. We're absorbing how to process the drama that's unfolding around us. So it's so important to know what we're consuming. So then when we have the bad day, we can look back and go, okay, what have I been consuming? Was it a whole lot of weed? Was it a whole lot of Desperate Housewives? Was it a whole lot of music or, podcasts, whatever? And then my hope is to give people practical tools that they can start to, take
Learn to navigate.
autonomy
Yeah. Now, did some of that come because you had mentioned in our last show, you had actually mentioned your first encounter with LSD, and you weren't in the right frame, and you got out to this concert, and there, yeah, and I believe you actually said it was like a version of hell. Like in your mind, like the statues were like crowd was, but then you had somebody who was watching, and then you were telling me that things kind of does some of that come from maybe that experience where you were able to kind of navigate the shifting of your perspective of how all that looked?
Yeah. Earlier in as the trip was beginning, I could see that people's faces would be distorted, right?
Like when
And
you were walking down the path to
right,
the
and I was
yeah
hot and muggy, and they were
yeah
all look like hot and muggy. And the we were looking for someone who had lost their phone, and my friend who I was with, he was ended up finding the guy, but had I thought was an angry conversation that they were about to get in a fight, and I was like, "Don't, no, don't fight!" And he's like, "Justice, I'm not about to fight this person." He was like, "I wish somebody would fight me," because he does martial arts and
yeah
stuff. He's like, "No one will want to fight me." So that was the beginning of the I'm projecting. Well, then there's the Easter Island cult that I was in, and then I was being chaperoned by this girl that I had just met, and her face, I'm telling you, was like shifting between it looked like demonic and like evil to like an angelic face, and it was freaking me out. And there was this one time we were standing at the back of this stage, and the music was just like wonky and weird, and it was hot. I just wanted to go back to the camp, but it was so far away, and she didn't want to do it, and all this stuff. And her face was just again weird and strange, and I noticed a speck of glitter like underneath one of her eyes, and I was like, I'm just gonna focus on that. I was like, that's pretty. And the second that I acknowledged that was beautiful, her eyes went from looking like weird and demonic to like angelic. And then once her eyes shifted to like an angel, the music suddenly went from weird minor chords to like a
yeah
major chord. And I swear I felt a breeze on my face. And I never say I'll never forget that, because you take care of someone with Alzheimer's, you realize you don't get to choose what you remember and what you don't. For as long as I am able to remember this moment, it will remain so impactful because it showed me in real time. Psychedelic is mind manifesting, right? So it showed me in real time how, just in the same way you can spiral down by stubbing your toe as soon as you wake up in the morning, and then you realize you needed gas and you didn't get it, and then the person in front of you cuts out, and like the world hates you. You can spiral up, and it starts by acknowledging something good. And how I translated this into my life is through the practice of gratitude. I mean, everyone talks about gratitude, and to ad nauseum, almost no one does it full time. And I didn't even like the idea of it. And I'm telling you, when I first moved in with my mom and was away from my friends and in the small town, and she's dying and it's COVID, it was not easy to find something to
be
be
great.
thankful or grateful for. So, but I started a little Google Keep list, and I demanded it of myself. I started doing breath work, and I started doing this. And at the end of every day, I listed 5 things, that what I call my 5 favorite things, little moments. Oh, I got the lady at Kroger let me in front of her, and I didn't have much to have. These sheets are soft, and the air's working, and sometimes it doesn't always work in the South, and it's uh, hot. And so doing that practice, that I've now done for going on 6 years, has completely transformed my life. And it started from that speck of glitter, because I I realized, okay, so your mind is a calculator, right? What do calculators do? They solve problems. Well, that means your brain is always looking for problems to solve. And if you don't give it one, and if you're not in immediate danger, someone's pointing a gun at you, there's a snake
hmm
in front of you, it's going to be looking for problems into the future based on what it got from the past, right? Problem, problem, problem. Well, you can use this to your advantage, though. So give it a problem that you want it to solve. So I gave it a problem. I wanted to find me something to be thankful or grateful for that I can't. The rule is end of every day, because it's a look back, it's retrospective. It can't be the same thing that you did name the day before, and get creative with how you name it. So I'll use emojis. I'll try to use like song titles or like book titles. And so when I go back through my list, it's an exact moment. Like it's this thing, this conversation, my favorite song came on at the Home Depot. And so I try to get creative with how I name it. And what's amazing is my brain now thinks that I'm winning, even when I got nothing in my checking account, because I have been doing it so long. I've articulated almost everything in my life as a gold coin. I like to use the example of Super Mario Brothers. Did you ever play
Oh,
original?
heck yeah.
Come on, love it. So what happens at the end of every level in the original,
The
right?
flag.
He runs, jumps up on the flag, and then he
Ding
runs
ding
off
ding
the
ding ding
screen
ding
to the
ding ding
black.
ding 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 ding
That's
ding
it.
ding 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 ding. Yep.
Those are the coins. My 5 favorite things is collecting the coins that I got on today's level
Oh, I love
of
that.
life. And so what's nice is when there's somebody blowing. I don't know if you can hear it outside. What's nice is when I'm moving through my world now, it sees coins because I've identified things that are meaningful, and I've said acknowledge that are good, as opposed to what happens to most of us. We're just suffering because our minds are left to their own devices and they're only looking for problems, right?
I love that. So I
So
I was listening. Yeah, I was listening to Jim Quick, and he says, "Life's a scoreboard. Like when you step out into the field, at the end of the game, at the end of the day, you know what the score is. Most people don't though, because they don't ever really get into the game. And one of the things that he said that helped me is, what are the three? You say five, so he says, what are the three things that if you accomplish those today, at the end of the day, when you're getting ready for bed, and you reflect on those three things, what were the three champagne moments where you won on the scoreboard? And I love this is so incredibly hard, yet so incredibly we just shift our perspective.
yeah.
I love the
And
Mario, like the
I love
Mario
to use
example.
you like that?
Love
Well,
that.
and we all know this, especially here in the States, right? We've all maybe test drove a new car before that we've never seen. And then we drive out the next day and suddenly we see them everywhere. Well, they didn't just roll off the lot. Your brain identified it as significant. And so now it's showing it to you. Your brain is trying to forget more than it remembers. And the reason I demand it of myself every day is because you think that you'll remember that one little moment, but I promise you, you absolutely won't. And because I've been doing this for so long, every now and then when I'm going down my list, I'll accidentally go the wrong way and and then I'll just start to read some and I'll be like, oh, I forgot about that. Oh my God. And so I'm making a function in the app, this tool, where I call it the serotonin button. You're having a bad day, go over there, hit that serotonin button. You're going to be reminded by the little and small moments that you have acknowledged that were meaningful, and watch as you change. And so it's one of the foundational tools of the app that will empower the whole ecosystem. And while Therapod is for the medicine work, and you can have some custom experiences in there to help support and create a unique experience for you during the medicine, it's not enough to do that. You need connection to your body, you need connection to your breath, and you need connection to community. And I love this quote. Do you know Sebastian Junger? He
Yes.
wrote Tribe. So his quote, as a species, we are wired to survive trauma, but we aren't wired to survive trauma by ourselves. And that's how I feel just in general in life, that we are really suffering today because we don't have communities, real in-person communities. And you may have a breakthrough moment in the medicine, but if you don't have a tribe that can help you integrate that into a life and what that looks like, odds are that pattern is going to return. So I'm expanding the concepts, the immersive design and bio monitoring concepts from Therapod into a group fitness, a social wellness club. And that is designed to amplify functional movement, breath work, and then community. And so at the end of a breathwork class, if you've selected it on your iPhone, There's a moment where you're looking up into the projected ceiling where you might see some of the things that you were thankful for come shooting across. You might see the person next door as well, which can inspire you for how you start to look at things. Because I'm inspired by how other people pray, right? You can be inspired by how other people are thankful for things as well. And one of the other things I'm really proud that we're having is if someone's going through something and maybe they don't have a community and maybe they don't have a therapist or someone that they can talk to, there's going to be an opportunity within the app where you can share what's going on, like what you're currently going through. You know, my wife left me, my father just died, I lost my job, something that is very difficult, but you don't have a supportive team. And at the end of like a breathwork session, we will have something called story time. And if someone had something to share, we can pull that anonymously using AI, change the sex and the names and the everything else, turn it into like a fairy tale. You can choose how it will be portrayed. And then we watch an animation about a moment that someone's going through in the room in this sort of anonymous way. And then when the lights come up, the practitioner can then open it up for people to share words of encouragement or words of comfort to that person, and they can remain completely anonymous. Yeah, the idea is to utilize this technology to actually create connection.
Building the tribe. And I love that you're doing it in that way. Because like we talked about in the very beginning of our last, we'll connect origin story. So whether we all know it, we're all on our own hero's journey, and just being able to realize that we're not the sole hero in our own journey, but that we do have an obligation to go back. And so where are you at with all of this right now? So I know you're hopping on a plane here to South by Southwest here very soon. I'm watching the
Yes.
clock. And where are we at? Like,
Yeah. Well, great question. What started off as just, again, Therapod, over the last couple of years, I realized that for it to be successful, I needed to solve a few more problems. And one of them was shoring up the fragmented wellness industry because all the practitioners are basically independent contractors. It's hard for people who need the help to find them. And then if you find someone, a therapist, which I did during my darkest days, I had 4 sessions. And by the time she started talking, I was like, this is not a match. Did I go back and find somebody else? No, I just kept going
yeah,
on with my life.
same.
And that wasn't even psychedelic therapy. So I realized that also a lot of the people doing the leading the medicine work are yoga practitioners, breathwork people, and having to wear all these hats of booking spaces because none of them own their own spaces, right? Booking spaces, taking payments, trying to build an integration, a way to for preparation and integration. So I've spent the last year developing an app that will power all three of the suite of immersive wellness environments. And very excited because my take on it is, as you said, it's based in story. You know, I'm a storyteller. I've been in movies and TV for 20 years, right? The nature of therapy isn't to change the past, it's to tell a better story about what happened. And so I'm going to be giving people the tools to do that in a gamified way that they may not end up needing a therapist or what I call our mentors. But if they do, high fidelity sort of matching algorithm, as well as a way for the practitioners to showcase their approach that goes beyond just bullet points on a web page. So I'm actually raising money right now to go into development to build the clickable prototype for that because we're going to launch first with because you can, even before our environments are created, you will be able to build, practitioners can build programs and services that point people to current studios and retreats. And in June of this coming year at the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference, we're working to have a therapod installation there in their deep space environment. It's not been confirmed yet, but we are in talks right now to make that happen where people can actually get in, experience the environment, and have a wearable that dynamically responds to their state within the room itself. So, really excited about that happening. And as I'm going to be at South by Southwest, I'm also letting people know about the documentary So many hats that I'm trying to have happen. They
Yeah.
all sort of overlap, but yeah, I'm currently looking for collaborators and people interested in shoring up the future infrastructure to support this great medicine. And anyone who is a practitioner in the various levels of it, I would love to hear more about your story, where your sticking points are. I'm trying to solve that for you so you can focus on the work that you're called to do, which isn't to run a business and respond to Instagram DMs. So yeah, that's where we're at.
I love it. And that was such a perfect close to this. So I will, we've already posted, and I posted waves. I posted Therapod on the last episode. Just want to get this story out because it's so incredibly raw and just it's been so great getting to know you and to be able to help in the way that I can. Listeners, I will continue to give updates on where we are with their pod and justice journey. Yes.
Oh, I forgot. Yes, my patent. We filed for the patent to own
Awesome.
bioadaptive therapeutic environments, which will cover all of our environments. It just came through for approval. So we're heading on
Woo!
to the patent prosecution highway, and they're just we're
Uh,
in that last step, but all of our claims were deemed inventive and non-obvious. And so there's basically two similar patents. One is for a virtual a bioadaptive environment that I think Compass Pathways has. And then we have the physical bounded room bioadaptive environment where you're actually in the space and the room responds dynamically to you and the practitioner is aware of the internal state. And my hope is that we can finally give practitioners the tool of environment, which has long been, this big factor, but constantly variable. So now we have something that is repeatable, dependable, customizable for the patient and for the practitioner, and really excited about the future of developing new protocols and experiences so we can bring this to the masses.
and we're going to continue to follow. And listeners, if you have not yet, like and subscribe. And I will have, as I did on the last episode, where to find justice and how we can keep track of Therapod and know where they're going. That this is Alan Wiederhold, Justice. Thank you so much again for joining us on this incredible show. And I wish you well at South by Southwest. Safe travels. And again, thank you, listeners. This is Alan Wiederhold. This is Numa.